something I've been thinking about, the kind of this weird phenomena of not only people who the whole canard of there being more than two genders out of this idea of performative gender expression or something, because well, you see women can wear pants now, and these really stupid takes that stupid takes and weirdo takes. They're just people who are weird. And something that really hit me is I started to think about, I was not necessarily athletic, and one of the things that fell apart for physical education, and it fell apart during my dad's era, that my father resented phys ed. He resented phys ed because, of course, a lot of the phys ed teachers, these would be the guy who taught history and the guy who taught driving class or something, or typing, was the football coach and baseball coach, and stuff like that. So, and maybe, maybe there's the math teacher, who also, taught phys ed. But what happened by the time I get into phys ed, this is notoriously to the point where there's jokes in movies during the 90s of the man-jawed, obviously gay woman who's teaching phys ed. And she's basically teaching kids how to play sports badly. And it's just, and so it's just becomes a slush fund to buy equipment that never gets properly replaced. It's kind of like the injured athlete who gets some sweet spot in the faculty of a public school, and then can, teach whatever, have whatever team that they run, and then also have, this awesome gig, teaching quote unquote phys ed. And so when Pavel Tsatsouline, in 99 brought the kettlebell back. So it turns out Scott Sonnen brought this up. He's the Clubbell dude and the tactical TacFit guy. TacFit by Scott Sonnen. I highly recommend it. He's the guy I always recommend for Into Flow. So it turns out at one of the first of these seminars that Pavel Tsatsouline put on, there was the guy who created CrossFit, and there was also Scott Sonnen, and they were all at the same seminar, because so few people had ever heard of somebody giving an entire seminar on the use of the kettlebell, which was at that time really kind of a forgotten tool of weight training and fitness, that only people who kind of knew of sort of old-timey strength and circus strength people, and Kate, I want to say her name was Kate Rogers, the woman who lifted 2 horses and riders. Now, of course, I think they were technically like Shetland ponies or something. They weren't full-size steeds. Somebody had to point this out. So these weren't full-size steeds. These were horse jockeys, and these were small racing horses that she lifted. But still, that was quite a lift. She was famous for this thing called the back press. And so I'm trying to remember her name. It's not Tatiana and not Titania. I'd have to look it up again. But if you look up old-time strong women, you'll find these amazing stories of where people were impossibly strong. So what had happened after World War II and after the Korean War, you get all these veterans who were teaching stuff like phys ed, and the only way they really knew how to train people was in a fashion like the military. So things falling into sport, eventually physical culture by my generation of the Gen Xers, and then beyond that, really the millennials. You really, really saw this with the millennials. This absolute focus on club sports, keep the kids busy. This is why even the idea of oh, to reduce gun crime, all you need is these young men to play basketball late at night or something. Even this idea like Tim Pool brought up, oh, you want, phys ed courses, people should learn how to skateboard, and which, is one of the most dangerous possible things. Like, I mean, it was just so utterly idiotic that I was like, this is proof positive that Tim is the long result of this weakening of America in a lot of ways. And not, and he is who he is, it's just, but it was really one of those things. I was like, that's very shit lib, like, well, I did this and I came out okay, that it's not that he tried a lot of different things and then started to see what not only works for me, but seems to work for other people. And as somebody who that was my thing, I did a bunch of different things, saw what worked for people. Like teaching martial arts as phys ed is not a good idea. The only thing I could recommend would be judo and jiu-jitsu as a relatively standard club that you would have at schools, and that the entire idea is separated for the most part by sex/gender. Because the women will eventually not be able to compete against the raw strength of the boys, and the boys will end up at some point hurting them. And I know there's a lot of people who teach these sports who will disagree, and it's like, you put this in a general population and not a completely voluntary population and see what happens. Once you make this widely available, you'll see what happens. So but it's also, as time's gone on, I do think that a good portion of education should be separated by gender after pretty much about the age of 10 or 11, because of the way that girls mature and boys mature, and how you must slowly develop boys into maturity of manhood, and the way you have to occupy them compared to girls. Because girls will simply obey directions much more readily. They just obey directions much more readily. they're just far less rambunctious. And the way that boys have to kind of put things together is different. Like, our brains actually work completely differently to solve problems. And this is why the gender freaks and these ruined gender tards, they're ruined people. They've actually had their brains and their physiology all fucked up by people who wanted to just treat boys and girls just absolutely the same, not getting that it's like, no, they actually do have to be treated somewhat differently. And especially in a society like ours, that the groups of people are in no way, shape, or form universal in culture or race. And so you'll have people who, they've been exposed, their people have been exposed to written language for maybe 1,000 years more than another group of people. And that they have entirely different cultural norms as well. And so that's why I more and more, I'm like, no, this is, and you have to give people that option, that it shouldn't be that there's like these district schools you have to go to, that it's really that there's the boys' school and the girls' school, and there's bunches of those, and then there's the school that is both boys and girls, and that's like a magnet school, because you have to be able to, provide evidence in some way, shape, or form that you have your shit together enough to handle that kind of environment. And it's also because, notoriously, if girls are going to fail, it's going to be they fail at their first signs of sexual maturity. They start to want to attract boys' attention, and they want to start to garner the status symbol importance that is pretty much the basis of the way that women interact with one another. That they establish a hierarchy of who is the prettiest girl, who is the girl who the most number of men want to procreate with. They are not competitive in the same way that boys are. Who is the one who is the winner? Which is just a different realm. It's just an entirely different concept. I actually one time think that I rang the bell with some woman where I said, well, but, because she was like, oh, and these people, with their kids. And I said, yeah, but that woman won. And she's like, what do you mean? And I was like, she has passed on her genes, and that's all that matters. She won. I was like, it's weird for women to not pass on their genes. Men, that's why men have so many mutations of the brain. You have always like a portion of men who must be thinned from the herd because of their criminal behavior and their deviance. And so it was that because nature can risk doing something interesting with men rather than women, where with women, if you have mutations, they won't be able to breed. They'll be less likely to pass their genes on, which is that somebody's got to be the control in an experiment of sorts. Why nature works that way, no one understands, but it seems that that's how it works. So one of the key things I started to find was that progressive calisthenics, as put out by when Pavel Tsatsouline and his whole group had the Dragondoor publications, the phenomena that convict conditioning came out, and this guy presented like what are the methods that are basically progressive calisthenics, that body weight alone and a few very simple implements like a chair, a backpack, a medicine ball, that these can be used to gain almost superhuman strength, and so that's when you see the whole thing of people working up to the point on YouTube where they're doing one-hand handstand push-ups. That came out of Pavel Tsatsouline's group and Dragondoor. And so, and then people doing the pistol squat jumps up onto tables and things like that. So that whole phenomena really was sort of the mind. That was where the mind was blown. And that changed. Those people changed fitness. The kettlebell people changed fitness because Pavel Tsatsouline then started to point out he wasn't the only person who was doing what he was doing, and especially with the I think it's called Strongfirst group that he put together, but he basically pointed out like Ripito is somebody that a lot of people just didn't know about unless they were into powerlifting. And Mark Ripito ends up becoming super famous, and Westside Barbell, already famous, becomes even more famous because all these people wanted to know about the way that these people had put together these methods of training that were so effective and got people so far ahead. This also exploded the phenomena of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and made Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu suddenly something that almost everybody wanted to do because of not Steve Cotter, it's the other Steve from Dragondoor, but that he ended up making Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is super, super duper, and wrestling, the generally wrestling training. There's even the scientific wrestling thing where the Macebell came out of the bunch at Scientific Wrestling, and I'm forgetting that guy's name too. He was one of those who actually, if he was not very good at first at popularizing himself, and there was, I think it was even Tsatsouline even wrote about him, saying that or Sonnen wrote about him and just mentioned him, like that he knows somebody who's almost a superhuman wrestler, and knows all these methods from old-time wrestling training, but he had not made himself very famous. He just was not, that wasn't his bag. He just trained his people. And so the thing that I started to think about was, you get now this generation of people who are just gender tards, who never trained. They don't understand the key physical and physiological and mental differences between females and males, and how important that is. And that really, a lot of what a past generation was doing to sort of perfect themselves, and really without even knowing it, that they were being handed keys to the kingdom in a lot of ways. And they had no idea, like, oh, manners and grace classes were actually a thing that perfected women. And I know this from my grandmother, that my grandmother taught those as classes. She was trained, she was given a lot of money. You know, she was very successful, and that these were women of a certain class. Kevin Samuels has kind of brought this up, that there was real training for a woman to become a woman of higher society, that she could be brought up levels of society if she trained herself in the ways of a higher level of society. And grace, dance, gymnastics, grammar, manners, these were all things that made women able to level up. And that's one of the most important things, like where there was some interview I saw with Megan the Horse, and I mean, Megan the Horse is really about a 6. I mean, when it fundamentally comes down to it, she's not really, she you know, because it's because she's heavy. She's heavy set. She's not a Lauryn Hill. Lauryn Hill is like that 7 to 8. You know, no ifs, ands, or buts, no doubts. You know, Megan the Horse is a heavy set, like, you know, heavy set stripper. You know, and that's, yeah, and looks heavy set. Like when you see a picture of her from her shoulder, from her, you know, kind of chest region upward, she looks like a heavy set girl. And so, and is very kind of normal looking, is not really anything more than kind of good looking. Like she wouldn't be beautiful. She would not be described as beautiful. And so there was this interview where it was supposed to be the hot girl summer interview, and it's just these two 6s discussing hot girl summer, how to make it a hot girl summer, what is a hot girl summer. And it was just sad. It was just really sad because it was so low class. That's like the most important thing that I think a lot of women are missing, is that they're just low class, and they don't get that there's a level of perfection that comes from the secular part of our society, that for all the religious stuff, for all the ethics and morality and things like that, it's that there really is fundamentally this idea of no, in the secular part of our society, there really is that which makes you somebody that people admire. They truly admire you, no matter almost who they are. That when you enter a room and you speak to people, you know how to speak to many different kinds of people, because you have done that. You've done the arts that cause you to truly know yourself by testing your limits. The reason why women don't like manners and grammar and this, that, and the other is because they could be wrong. So they're not really testing themselves. And this is the same for men who have to like mix with high muckety mucks and highfalutin people. They have to learn how to speak to them. Like my grandfather was very lucky that Maxine taught him all this stuff about grammar and manners, because it made making deals and dealing with important people much easier for him, because he started to learn all these things that he was fundamentally doing wrong, that were not in making him capable of getting the potential earnings that ended up he was able to leave a lot of money to the next generation. And and pretty much after her death, like live in retirement in comfort. And so for the import for, I find, males is that the way that physical education, really understanding the bones, the ligaments, the tendons, this is obviously not what physical education has been for probably a generation. This is something that once you get into like a junior college level course, like massage therapy, you start learning that kind of stuff. And the thing is because you have to learn about the physics of how the tendons and ligaments and muscles work. You have to learn about the actual terms, eccentric and concentric. You have to learn terms like bifurcation and things like that. That all becomes, you can suddenly put together a lot of geometry. You could put together a lot of biology. There's all these other things. Suddenly you have the textbook in your hands and it's your body. You just had to know the definitive terms. That's why so many of these you see these Zoomers on TikTok that are all gender-tarded because they don't even know how their body functions. And at best, they've been taught like some sports that are supposed to teach them physical education. But they don't know the difference between their semimembranosus and semitendinosus. And those are two things that if you pull one but don't pull the other, it's very important. You have to know, how do you keep yourself from pulling your ankle or damaging your joints? That's really important to know. And then but it's also, we didn't have, say, like how the traditions of, say, something like Pilates and all that, that's all very nice and well and good. But these are just kind of fad versions of gymnastics and calisthenics, which have been around since the 1800s, in the golden age of physical culture. And you could find pictures that go back to the golden age of physical culture. You could find all these old books that taught this stuff. It's just that the baby boomers resented being made to do something that was rigorous, that they and really almost like military training. And it was because of how the school system was more and more something that was almost military in nature. These schools that were built by prison builders and these veterans, and how the school systems started to become more and more these centralized, these kind of centralized things, and with these curriculums being handed down from above. I was just thinking about this because there's an entire generation of young women who have no idea how much their lack of knowledge about how their body functions is going to cost them health-wise. It's already and mentally even, that they don't understand, no, for a period of your life, if you keep your musculature very strong, if you actually understand how to properly train your body, you are really going to be way ahead by the time you're an adult. It's an investment that pays off. It pays off. And I'm just very glad that at one point my father, he wanted very badly to stay quote unquote in shape at a certain stage of his life. And so we bought a weight set. And I was just very fortunate to fundamentally kind of inherited that weight set by default. And it's paid off. And then when I got into martial arts, that also that changed the entire way my brain and nervous system worked. Like I suddenly could play like basketball, like suddenly out of nowhere. I could suddenly understand what to do when I was playing sports, rather than sort of being this gangly googly running around not really understanding what the idea was. And now, and I mean, and everything comes with time and experience, but I have to think about that because I benefited from coming to some understanding about this, and really that this is something that in the long run, I think, is that the training in physical culture and really this very idea of physical culture is coming back, but it's coming back too slowly, and that there really has to be this complete change in the way that we think of physical education, because it's how one learns not just how to use their body, but learns how to actually make their nervous system function correctly, and also makes their physiology mature properly. All right, later.